Welcome to a brand new episode of the AWFL podcast, where we dive into the captivating underdog comeback story of Joe Rogan and Dana White. Join us as we explore how a community of underdogs united, transforming from being vilified to verified. Today, we express our gratitude to the incredible AWFL community for their unwavering support as we kick off this transformative journey. For any feedback or thoughts, feel free to contact the show at mcmedia.network.llc@gmail.com. And stay tuned as Lonnie takes you through the process of navigating the official McMedia Network website, and get ready to be inspired, empowered, and uplifted as we celebrate the spirit of the underdog. Let's make this episode one to remember on the AWFL podcast.
There's definitely a bunch of 48 laws of power type stuff that took place with certain people. I just get that.
Yeah, like Putin, right? Like Putin got to the top through some crazy power dynamics.
Oh, I'm sure he understood a lot of that stuff. Yeah.
Right.
So, I think it's necessary. It's out of necessity a lot of times when people have to come together to build big things and work together.
Yeah.
And there's just that element of, there's no replacement for loyalty, right? I mean, there's no amount of money, like the true wealth is having like loyalty, right? They say. So something you just got to remind yourself of. And I think when you're creating something from nothing and you actually created something, it creates that anxiety like, oh my God, I did it. I can't lose this. But you can also have the other perspective like, dude, I was looking for this when I found this one. I started from nothing. Who's to say I can't do this again if this doesn't work? I've got my values. I've got the things that are important to me that I won't betray no matter what, even if I have to risk this. Because like I said, like I was trying to get here when I got here this time. Who's to say if I need to, I can't get here again the next time, because I still got that team. I got that loyalty. I got those people I stay true to. Dana White, for example, he tells the story about when they were canceling Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan was getting hardcore. Everybody's trying to cancel Joe Rogan for a minute.
I remember that.
And the network that UFC was on at the time was trying to tell Dana White, like, I think it's time to kind of, take him off. Like, let's not have him announce or be a host for the events for a while. And he straight up said, he's like, I'll roll this whole thing up, and whatever happens, happens. That's one person I will stay true to. That's one person.
I love that.
And I mean, from the outside looking in, it's like, wait a sec, you're the president. You're like the CEO type dude, like one of the main founders of this, like now like $10 billion company. We're talking about Joe Rogan, who, I mean, he does just fine on his own, and he's the announcer, right?
Yeah.
Because Dana White's been making some podcast rounds, and I've kind of caught different clips of him talking about this a little bit. He says, no, what you don't understand is there was a bunch of really big hurdles and challenges that UFC faced at the beginning that Joe Rogan was absolutely instrumental, and he's just as vital in the success of this as you name it, anybody, me, anybody else, because he's obviously a really good speaker, right? I remember when he was a host on Fear Factor, he was a host on the Man Show. I remember being however young I was during Man Show.
I remember the Man Show.
We were young. We weren't even men.
Yeah.
I was not even a man yet watching the Man Show. And I remember thinking to myself, like, how was this guy so good at this? He was just so comfortable, so good at talking even back then.
Yep.
And I didn't even know what I was watching, or I don't even know how I knew to think that. But he even struck me as someone that's like, I'm like, he's way better than this other guy hosting. This guy's so good at talking and stuff. This is awesome. So he had that. And then he had a martial arts past, and he had a bunch of jujitsu and stuff. So now when he's commentating for these UFC events, especially at the beginning, way in the early days, not the very beginning, because Dana White only bought it after there was like X amount of events through the previous company. But so I guess the story is, check this out. Dana White and the Fertitta brothers bought UFC from the previous guy that owned it because they found out that he was going broke and he was going bankrupt, and UFC wasn't going to be around much longer, so they could buy it for pennies on the dollar. Yeah. So when they bought it, he's like, it turns out like all we really bought was like 3 letters, dude. Like, he had already sold all the merchandise rights, all the movie rights, all of everything to Lionsgate. He had already sold off all the fighter contracts to other promotions. So they paid like $2 million for like, and he said there were some offices back in New York. They were headquartered in New York. There were some old offices and stuff. And one of these offices had just a ton of VHS tape. And Dana White's like, one of my jobs was to go through every one of these tapes because we don't know what's on them. We don't know if there's like some classic fights. We got to make sure that we're keeping as much of the stuff as we can. And he said he's watching through all of them. And he's like, a bunch of them are just random shows that like were recorded. Like they're just taping shows. And they were taping what was it? It was a talk show. I can't remember the guy's name. But the guy had Joe Rogan on. So he's watching this old VHS tape of a talk show where Joe Rogan was a guest on it.
Of a young Joe Rogan?
Yeah, real young Joe Rogan, way back in the day. And the guy's asking him about you because just as a fan, Joe Rogan is just a fan at this point, and he speaks so well, right? So
right.
he was friends with Eddie Bravo, who's the founder of 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu, and he's got these really epic matches where he beat like really big Gracie names and stuff. And him and Joe Rogan were like homies. Eddie Bravo's the one that showed Joe Rogan, like got him to start smoking weed and stuff. Yeah. So this is at a point where Joe Rogan, he's really into jiu-jitsu with his buddy Eddie Bravo, and he's really into UFC, and he's got that Taekwondo or whatever competitive martial art he was doing back in the day. So he's just a big fan of it, and he's talking about it on whatever this talk show was. And Dana White's like, of all those videos I watched, the most valuable thing I found was that obscure little interview on an old show, because I knew that Joe Rogan was my guy and I had to have him as a commentator for UFC. They didn't even know each other outside of that. So he reached out to him and he said, hey, I want you to be the guy that's cage side talking about this stuff. And Joe Rogan's like, he's like, so you're telling me I'm going to have the best seat in the house for free? It's like, yeah. So he did like the first 12 to 15 shows or something for free. So he helped them get out of the game.
Great deal, though. You and I would have done that.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a win-win, but he was so good at it, and people didn't know what they were watching. When you got two guys standing up punching each other, you know what you're watching. But when it goes to the ground and all of a sudden one guy's tapping, you're like, what just happened? Like, I don't get. And they'll replay it in slow-mo, and you kind of see that his arm was doing something weird. Well, Joe would walk the audience through that stuff. Like, okay, so what he has here is this. And he would predict, he's like, what he's doing is he's trying to position himself for this move. You'll see he's putting his leg over here. Now he's going to grab the wrist on top here. Yep. And now watch, he's going to create, see what's going on here? And he's walking the audience through it. And now you know what's going on. You're like, okay, this jiu-jitsu stuff's kind of cool if somebody can like help me know what I'm watching. So he was super instrumental in that regard too. And so fast forward all this time later, the networks are like, yeah, you got to can Joe. He's like, no, I'm not doing it, dude. You have no clue. Like, he is so important with all of this. Dude, the Dana White story is insane, actually. Crazy, like, random amounts of, like, I don't want to call it luck. I don't know what you would call it. Serendipity, maybe? Where he had all these different steps that kind of took place in his life where, let me look at some of this stuff. So he started as a boxing trainer in Boston back in the day, back when, like, who was that guy? Who was that crazy mobster in Boston? Something White or something, killed a bunch of people, crazy. Like, so this was I don't even know when this was, probably like the 90s. This was a lot more modern than you'd think when you hear about like some of the environment in Boston at the time, because it was definitely ran by Whitey Bulger.
Whitey Bulger, that's what it is.
So that guy was still running Boston back then, and he had his goons everywhere running stuff. And there were like rules. There were like things like you couldn't call the cops. You had to call his people to come fix stuff. And he always knew if you called the cops somehow and you didn't want to be known as someone to call the cops for anything. Like, they just don't want you calling the cops. They want to be their own police. Well, it turns out, side note, he knew everybody's calling the cops because he was an informant that whole time, and he was talking to the cops directly. So they would be like,
Dana was?
No, Whitey Bulger. Yeah. So, but anyway, so one of Bulger's guys came to Dana White with his business he was running, because I guess he was doing pretty good with like a boxing training business. And he just said, he's like, you owe me money. And he's like, why? I don't owe you any money. Like, he's like, no, you owe me money, and you have till X amount of days to pay me. And he's like, whatever. And then they call him the day before. They're like, that day is coming up tomorrow, so you better have that money. If you don't have it now, you better have it tomorrow. He's like, or what? What are you going to do? Like, you're going to find out. He said, no, I'm not. Took a one-way flight to Vegas that night. Grabbed as much.
No, I'm not.
Flew to Vegas. And I don't know. I always thought he flew to Vegas because he knew the Fertitta brothers, but I don't think he knew them. I think he just came there because that was a central area for boxing, right? Like, a lot of the big fights were in Vegas and the big casinos and stuff like that. So he figured that'd be a great place to kind of build a boxing gym, you know? And he had this gym with this Muay Thai guy, and he had the other guy in the gym was one of Floyd Mayweather's uncles. So it was him, Floyd Mayweather's uncle, and this crazy Muay Thai guy. And he's like, dude, he said he's got so many crazy stories from all that, but he actually, he knew Floyd when Floyd was a kid, like back in like his Olympic days and stuff. He's like, even
Nice.
back then, he was a good-looking kid, very charismatic, incredible boxer. He's like, I remember one time, one of his first big fights where he got a decent check. He brought me over to his apartment and he's showing me all these sweaters and everything he's buying with the money. So he's like, Floyd's been that guy since day one, since he was a kid. He was taking his money and he's buying clothes and doing all that stuff. So he's doing okay there. And he said that he was really busy. He was really trying to make moves. And he let all his friends know, because that's kind of the way Boston was. And you have a lot of friends and there's always weddings. You always have friends that are getting married and stuff like that. And it's part of the tradition where it's like, all the friends come to the wedding and you kind of got to be going to people's weddings and stuff. And he's like, I reached out to everybody. I told everybody, he's like, I'm super busy. I'm out here in Vegas. I'm grinding. Like, I'm just letting everybody know it's nothing personal. I'm not going to anybody's wedding. It's not that I'm only going to a few
I'll be
weddings.
back in a few years.
Yeah, I'm not going to know. I'm not doing none of that stuff. And so something happened where it was in Vegas and he ends up, after a while, finally going to one wedding. And it was at that wedding that he met one of the Fertitta brothers, because one of the Fertitta brothers was like, hey, I hear you train boxing. I want to start working out and start training boxing and kind of getting into that stuff. And Fertitta brothers, they own the Union casinos. They're ballers. They're already probably almost billionaires at this point.
Yeah.
And so he makes really good friends with one of the Fertitta brothers just through that. And he's training them and stuff like that. So now he's kind of got those brothers that he knows and he's cool with them. I think they're even at a point where they're doing some jiu-jitsu training together and they're just kind of like homies in that work. And Dana White becomes a manager, Tito Ortiz, who was one of the biggest names in UFC at that time.
Yeah.
And Tito was supposed to get paid a certain amount for one of these big UFC events. And then they look at all the pay-per-views and they look at all the ticket sales and they tell him right before the fight, they're like, hey, we're not paying you that. Sorry. We're just not going to pay you that. I mean, we'll pay you some, but it's not going to be that. This isn't going as well as we thought, which is a huge red flag. Like,
yeah,
that's got to be like one of the last things you'd want to do as a promoter or as like the owner of an organization like that. Is if it gets to the point where you can't pay the fighters and you have to literally just look them in their face and say, sorry, that's not good. So the writing was on the wall there, and then Dana White's his manager. So now Tito ends up having to fight and takes whatever little check he can. And now they're renegotiating the contract because his contract's up and they're trying to renegotiate a new contract. And Dana White's, going to bat for him, trying to get as much money. And he's also trying to like say, hey, and he needs the rest of his money from this other fight and stuff. And I guess the current owner at that point kind of just blows up. He's like, hey, what if I told you that we don't have that money? What if I told you that there's really no money? So I don't even know what we're really trying to renegotiate here. So Dana's like, okay, whatever. And he kind of slides over and calls one of the Fertitta brothers. He's like, hey, dude, I think we could buy UFC for like pennies on the dollar right now. And so that's what they do. They bought it for like $2 million or something like that. And I don't know if you remember, my memory is when I was a kid, do you remember Neil Holmes, baseball player, a little bit younger? You might have crossed paths with him in all the Little League days and stuff like that. He was a little bit younger than us, but he lived on the other side of the block from me in Carson City there. And I would just walk over and go hang out with him sometimes. And one time I came over and him and his dad, He's like, you want to come in and watch this? My dad just got a pay-per-view. And it was like in the middle of the day, like early afternoon, late morning. Or
like 2 p.m. You're watching a pay-per-view?
I'm like, pay-per-view? I'm like, that doesn't sound like no boxing to me. And that's the only thing I ever knew pay-per-view was at that point. Because I would watch pay-per-view boxing with my dad sometimes. And it was dude. And it was these guys getting in a cage. And this was back when one guy's wearing like a gi with like his black belt and his karate pants.
It's crazy days.
Yeah, and another guy over here is like dressed in like knee pads, looking like a WWF guy or something like that.
Yeah, I do remember that.
There was a guy that had one boxing glove, but one bare hand. Like, I'm going to use my boxing skills, but I'm also going to use my street fighting skill or whatever. Yeah. So I watched that live pay-per-view at my buddy Neil's house with his dad, and I'm like, oh my God, what is this stuff? So that was my first memory. That's when the first owner still owned it. Now, fast forward, they've got it. They're doing their best with it. They're making it a way better promotion. It's getting way better than it was before. But I guess fast forward a few years, and the Fertitta brothers like, hey, dude, we're in the hole like $30 million. So they're not making money. They're losing. I mean, they're still selling decent amount of pay-per-views, just not enough. They're starting. Oh, and they went to Lionsgate. This is how nobody believed. You want to talk about like a come from behind story. Lionsgate, who that guy, the previous owner, had sold like all the movie rights, DVD rights, merchandise, all the little accessory stuff around a brand. They sold it all to Lionsgate. They went to Lionsgate like, hey, we want to buy that back from you now that Dana and the Fertittas had it. And Lionsgate's like, cool. And the way they treated him in that interview, it's like, if you idiots really want to give us money for the rights to this stuff back, like, we'll take your money, but like,
but you're an idiot.
This isn't worth anything. Like, this is all, like, UFC is not going to make it. Like, fast forward, he even said in one of the stories he's telling, like, fast forward, he's like, can you imagine how pissed Lionsgate is right now that they did that? They like billions of dollars. They kind of missed it.
Yeah.
So now they're down. They're still not making money because you got overhead, you got employees, you got all sorts of different stuff that you don't think about. Even though but they started making a little bit of money because they got their DVD rights back. So remember, like when you go into Blockbuster or something, you'd see like the best of, like best knockouts, best knock, like UFC DVDs. So I guess they were making money on that, but it still wasn't putting them in the black. That was like their main money maker. And one of the Fertitta brothers, I can't remember their first names. One of them calls them and says, "Hey, we're in the hole a lot. We're not making enough money. This isn't quite working. So what I want you to do is I want you to go shop around and see what we could sell it for. See what someone will pay for this."
Mm-hmm.
And the most he got was like, he's like, someone will give us like $6 million or $10 million for it. Well, that's not even going to cover their loss. So I guess the Fertitta brothers like, all right, well, I'll give you a call tomorrow. And he's like, we're done. This is done. Like he remembers that night and he's like, that's not going to be a good call tomorrow. This is freaking whatever. He was already doing okay before UFC. He was already starting to become a manager for big names like Tito Ortiz. He was a manager for a big boxer who he negotiated. He got one of his boxers a fight with Roy Jones Jr., which was a pretty big deal and made his guy a couple million. So he wouldn't be as big as he is now, but I'm sure he was one of those guys that was going to figure it out one way or the other and do okay. So the next day he gets a call from Fertitta, and Fertitta's like, fuck it. We're going to ride this out. We're going to keep going, dude. Let's keep going. Let's keep doing this.
Yeah.
Because they're so rich. They're billionaires that, 30, 40 million, dude, that's an insane amount of money. But to him, he's like, you know what? Let's dig in a little bit. So then they came up with the idea for the reality TV show, The Ultimate Fighter. And they knew that if they could get on a free TV network, get that brand exposed on free TV, which technically, even though you're paying cable, there's all those channels that are kind of still not pay-per-view, right? When a pay-per-view model business says free TV, that's what they mean. And so Spike TV was just getting started at that point. It was kind of like a man's thing,
Yeah, I remember Spike.
And so they go to Spike and they pitch this idea for a show, and that's when reality TV was starting to get really big, and that's kind of what this was. And even Spike's like, nah, kind of like Lionsgate, they're like, UFC ain't gonna do shit. Like, no, we're good. So Dana goes and talks to the Fertitta brothers, and they say, you know what, fuck it. Let's call them back and tell them we'll fund it too. So we'll put up all the money to produce the show. So it's free. So you're going to get this cool reality TV show for free on your network. Which ended up being the best thing because they kept all the rights to all their TV stuff too. They didn't no network. So Spike's like, okay, well, we can't say no to that. So I guess you got a show now. So I think that was like, the way Dana described, he said that he's like, that was like 10 million. He's like, that was the last 10 million that we we're going to put into this. So we had to make it work. We had to make it work. And it worked. It got really popular. It was getting crazy ratings. And then the finale, when they had like the two finalists, that was Stephen Bonner and Forrest Griffin. They just slugged it out on free TV. And this was before social media and stuff. And I guess when they're able to see the ratings, I guess you're able to look at the TV ratings in a way to where you can compare it with phone call statistics from these households. I guess that's all connected in a way, or you can look at them together. And they deducted, they're like, not only was it like getting the craziest ratings, like people were like, there was another big sporting event going on at the time. Like people were like switching the channel to watch that last fight. And they were showing the phone call data from those same households. And they were basically able to prove, they're like, dude, before social media, people are literally picking up the phone and calling their friends like, hey, turn it to Spike right now. You got to see this. This is insane. You've got to watch this. These guys are going for it. This is like the most epic fight ever.
Oh, that makes sense, I guess, in a weird way.
Yeah. So, and I guess what he was trying to describe there, like they were showing like crazy like social media type numbers even before there was social media, and all you could do is pick up the phone and call your homie. Couldn't even text them or anything really. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And that kind of set them forward in the face of everything, in the face of kind of getting put together by the guy they bought it from, where they just basically, like he says, he's like, we bought an old shitty octagon with like busted wood and 3 letters and a bunch of VHSs basically. And then Lionsgate like, yeah, here, take it back for $1 million, $500,000. You can have all your rights back. Good luck. And then Spike's even like, no, we don't want to do that show. Ended up being it wasn't their highest rating show because they had another show on there that they didn't create. It just switched over to them. But it was their highest rating like show that Spike created. Like Spike originated it, kind of founded the show, as far as everybody knew. And it was really just UFC.
So they get a little bit of the credit.
Yeah, so it was like they were just doing crazy numbers and all these people that didn't believe in them and stuff. And now look at it, dude. They sold for $4 billion to the company that currently owns it. And now I guess it's evaluated at closer to $10 billion already, which is insane. And then
that is crazy. That is a cool story, man.
Yeah. Kind of drawn out. But dude, if you want to talk about a come from behind underdog situation, that kind of thing motivates me like crazy. It totally motivates me.
Yeah. That is a beautiful story.
He had investors though. So that shows you how hard some of the stuff can be, especially in the promotion world. It's really hard to be a successful promoter. But he even had partners that had tons of money. So imagine how much of an underdog, how much the odds are against someone, and how motivating of a story can come from like someone that's trying to create something from nothing, or bootstrap. They call it bootstrapping because I guess you tighten the straps on your boots and that's your thing.
I guess.
But I've always loved the concept of something from nothing. And the more you learn about it, the more I look into it, it isn't really from nothing. It's there are things that are very valuable and could have a monetized number attached to them, and they could be worth a lot. But it comes more from ingenuity, learning skills, and creating relationships and loyalty, stuff like that. So like me, for example, like I never had money to like open a business, like a brick and mortar business. I never had money to like go open my own bike shop or go open my own whatever type of business. But I knew that this thing called e-commerce was getting really big, and you can kind of just have your virtual store that lives on the internet, right? And that can't be too expensive. I mean, what's rent on one of those? Turns out, not that much. It can get expensive. You can start spending a lot, but there are ways to kind of get up and running with online stores and running a business virtually that are affordable and come down to your skill set and how much you can learn and develop your ability to become a web designer, to learn the whole game, right? So I ended up actually in that example, I created an online bike shop. It's called Commute Fit. It's still up and running to this day. And that's kind of become my passion. So I live in the e-commerce space now, and all my ideas, aspirations, current projects, they all are centered around that. And I'm super fortunate. So Dana White, super lucky in a weird way to have that goon in Boston tell him that he was going to basically kill him if he didn't pay him.
No shit.
If he didn't leave that night, it wouldn't have spawned the series of events, right? Just like he was lucky to go to that one wedding, even though he wasn't going to any of them, right? So there's all these little events that work good for him, even though you could look at it from the other way. Like, I was so busy trying to make a name for myself, and you know, I didn't have a ton of money, so I had to kind of tell my friends, I'm not going to weddings. Well, that ended up working out in his favor, the one he went to. I had these mobsters that were going to kill me and chase me out of my town and chase me away from my business across the country, basically. That's sad. That sucks, but it ended up not being sad at all. So, you know, in the world of creating something from nothing, even though it's not really nothing, there's actually a lot there when you look at it. E-commerce has been the most steady and exponentially growing trend in the business world over a year, since easily a decade plus at this point, and it's only getting bigger. And then there's different, you know, I'm focusing a lot of what I'm doing currently on merchandise and clothing and customizing stuff like that for businesses. The merchandise game, especially e-commerce merchandise game, has exponentially skyrocketed. And I didn't know that. I'm not psychic, and I'm not like poring over statistics. Like, I don't know market trends. I'm not like some super economic genius. So that's kind of something that's just worked in my favor and been, you know, kind of that stroke of luck that kind of came from the fact that I don't have a ton of money to start things. I didn't have that, you know, that Fertitta brother to dump millions of dollars into it, like that. So I think that kind of stuff's cool. So there's what do they call it? I hate to use the word silver lining. There's a better term for it, but there's in every potential downfall or something that feels like a setback could be the next big thing, or when you look back. And that's what Dana White was saying in that one of the interviews where he's kind of telling that whole story. he's like, everybody in this room, they can look back on their life, and there are those times where you came to a fork in the road, or there's things that just kind of unfolded how they did, and you look back and you're like, dude, that's crazy. I would have never guessed that meant this, that turned into this, you know what I mean? And landed me here. And it's all perspective, and it's all how you just willing to keep going, willing to like recognize that like, this is my time to keep going and keep pushing, because this might turn into, you know, something way more incredible, and only time will tell, you know what I mean? Basically anything other than quitting is like going to figure something out somehow, some way. So without sounding too cliche or whatever, but I know that's the theme. We're calling this, you know, the Awful Podcast. AWFL, that's the clothing line that we're having some fun with. So we need to get into, roll out the next season. But, you know, it's AWFL, acronym with 4 letters, right? So it's kind of an acronym. It's a fun game of like being clever with acronyms. The biggest one, I'd say the most commonly used one, is a win for the losers. And I love
that one. That's my favorite.
Yeah. That's a huge theme. And I think that can create a movement. There's a lot of people that feel like let's be real. I mean, without being too Debbie Downer, there's a lot of people that feel like they're fucking losers, dude. But there's still a fiber within them that they believe in themselves.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think there's a movement there. I think there's a lot of people that could pull together and really create a movement with that. And that's what I want to kind of continue to build this brand around, theme this podcast around, theme the clothing line around, and just create a movement, create a lifestyle around it.
Create a community of people with a big chip on their shoulder who just trying to do better, trying to do better
you can
things.
Be proud of. You can wear it like a badge instead of something that you're like I feel ostracized. I feel like I'm kind of like the dark sheep. I feel like I'm maybe not included in certain things because I'm, you know, maybe I'm like, I feel like I'm a loser a little bit or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, let's make that go. Let's flip that around, because if there's a lot of people that feel like that, but deep down know that that's not them, and that there is a lot of potential and there's a long way to go, uniting that, creating that community, like you said, that movement, that can turn into something to where it's like, there's all these people that I share this with, and we're all some cool people, and we all are actually some really strong, some really capable people. Now that's something that you're proud of. Now it's like, you know what? Yeah, cool. I'm a loser. Win for the losers, baby.
It's like being on the winning team, you know, when you're on the winning team, but you don't play, you still have the pride of being on the winning team.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And it's like, you know, the underdogs, I'm part of the underdogs, right? Like we come together and we do big, cool things. And it almost becomes like what was that song? Like a British singer. What was her name? Like Royal something. Lord. Yeah. The Royal song. Remember?
Yeah.
That's kind of what she created a movement with that. Like people were like, yeah, this is us.
I've never seen a diamond in the flesh.
Yeah. That kind of stuff. Like we're not royal, right? But it's something you're proud of. It's like everybody comes together and they're proud of that. I think that's super powerful. And I think there's something good and right about that too. You know what I mean? Like, there's no judgment. It's all inclusive, and it just builds, it builds confidence. It builds pride. And when you have something you can connect with, something that you're grounded in, you identify with, that lends itself to better life decisions and better trajectories just almost organically. Like, for example, let's say, we talked about this a little bit, I think, on previous podcasts, but let's say you start working out a little bit. You're not doing anything different. The only thing you did different is now you're working out 3-4 days a week. You had no plans of changing your diet. You had no plans of quitting smoking cigarettes. You had no plans of anything other than I just want to get in and lift. It makes me feel good. It helps with my stress. What you'll notice is a few months in, you're smoking way less cigarettes. And you didn't even plan, you weren't even intending to do that. It turns out when you go out to dinner and eat, you make a little bit of a healthier choice. It kind of just lends itself to this cascade of better decisions. And that kind of becomes true.
It becomes a domino effect with everything in your life. Like, you know, you start streamlining every part of your life. Like even from like an exercise that I did yesterday, I have grown since that. So I can do something more today. I can do like one more rep or something else. And then that'll lead me to the next thing. Like, all right, my arms are good. They're nice and sore. Maybe I can run today. You know, but it's just a domino effect of all these things.
And when you saw a little bit more it's not always easy to get yourself in the gym every day. Some days you're feeling better than others. Some days, you know, you're out working all day and you're like, dude, oh, last thing I'm gonna do is drag myself into the gym. But then you think about it, you're like, you know what, dude? I hit a new PR on chest last week.
Yeah.
Dude, I'm getting stronger. I wonder if I can throw another 2.5 on the ends today.
Right.
Now I want to see. Now I'm pumped.
And it's a small thing, but it's a huge win for you.
Oh,
you know?
Yeah, dude. If you could throw another 2.5 on, which you can't, but if you could throw another 2.5 on every week, you'd be you'd be Ronnie Coleman in like a year, dude. But
right.
It happens in all these different ways. So I do a lot of media and communications for my tribe, Kaw Nation, KAW. And it's great. It's so fun to work with them. They're incredible to work with. They give me, a lot of freedom being able to help them in all these different ways. And it makes me better at these skills. And it's just, it's kind of this really cool win-win. And I'm learning so much kind of, teaming up with my tribe, because I come from Northern Nevada all the way out here in Oklahoma now. So I'm like really new to a lot of this. And one of the things I learned recently, there was actually a really big study by, it was sponsored by a couple really big nonprofits. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but they basically did this really big peer-reviewed research project where they looked at tribes, Native American tribes, as well as other cultures and ethnicities. And they found that when students and children are actively engaging in their native language, like they're in some sort of native language program where you don't even have to become fluent. If you're just learning more about it and kind of learning some of the words and slowly, kind of like the equivalent of like taking a Spanish class in high school, right? But it's kind of with your native language, that it gives you more of a sense of purpose, makes you more rooted in your heritage, and gives you more of a sense of identity. And dude, they're showing like conclusively with all these different statistics and studies that these kids are way more likely to stay in school, way less likely to drink alcohol, way less likely to smoke cigarettes, cascades across all these different things, way healthier, way less likely to, suffer depression, way less likely to be involved with things that create family trauma and stuff like that. And it's something that you wouldn't even think was connected. Just participating and being a part of your native language shows that. And it's kind of that same thing with everything that we're talking about, like the message behind AWFL, the underdog mentality, underdogs unite, let's come together. It's a win for the losers, all the way to language, or like we're talking about working out. You know what I mean? Like that stuff all kind of grounds you in something and gives you more of a sense of purpose. And it's almost at like a subconscious level, like the fiber of your being. It's like, you know what, dude, I am somebody, I am something. And my day-to-day decisions are going to start reflecting that more.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, dude. Kind of like a subconscious thing, dude. Or, I mean, obviously conscious as well. If like you're so pumped on something, you get out of bed, you're like, today I'm going to kill it. I'm going to make all the right decisions. But even if like on those days where you maybe didn't get out of bed that fired up, it's still like on this lower level to where you're just like, you're out there kind of making that much more progress instead of going backwards. You know what I mean? So I love that. I love that message. A lot of that just comes back to something from nothing. People think that you have to be super smart or have some sort of educational background or come from a lineage of people that did it before you, or, be some sort of certain class to do certain things, whether that's be an entrepreneur, be successful, do anything you want. No, dude, you don't. And that's the beauty of it.
It's a decision. It's just a decision. Like, you have to choose. It took me forever. Like, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to do all the things I'm doing now. Years ago, I just had a mental block. I was drinking, depressed. I was all those vilified things that we talk about. And I didn't know how to see my way out of that. And so just, being able to figure it out for myself and start doing something. And like you said, it was very, very small. Like, it was just, first I bought this. This was my first thing that I bought so I could attempt to record music.
That's cool. I want one of those.
Yeah, it's dope. But that was the first thing, and I didn't know how to use it. It took me like 6 months just to get a sound out of it. And then I bought the audio interface. And then I bought, I just kept buying little things here and there. And all of a sudden, now I have lights.
What was the decision? What was it? Was it just a quick little decision? Like one day you're just on Amazon, you're like, I'm going to buy that just to see. Or was there
I made the decision.
Yeah.
It was a conscious decision. I was like, I want to be a content creator. because I've always been doing it. Jason and I were talking about that earlier. Like, even back in the day, like, writing is content. Like, I write all the time. I have always journaled, all that stuff. Making beats and stuff, looping off of cassette tapes. That's all content. I used to carry a Sony Handycam with me and Jason around to film myself rolling blunts, like to document us getting high and the process of us getting high. But we didn't have a platform. Like, I had nowhere to put it. You know, there was nowhere to put the content that I was making. So it just kind of came natural when I was thinking about it, and I made that decision, like, fuck it, I'm going to do this for real. I'm going to try to do this for real and be serious about it. So the decision was, I'm doing this on purpose now. You know, it was an intention instead of just, like, in passing, posting pictures of my kid, like, oh, look at that, that's cool, huh? You know, I'm actually going to try to entertain you. I'm actually going to try to inspire you. I'm actually going to try to motivate you. So that was kind of the decision for me anyway, you know?
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
I feel like, I don't know at what point I tuned into your journey and started seeing that you're doing it, but I feel like I was somewhere close to the beginning, maybe not at the very beginning, but I've definitely seen a transition. And I remember there was a clip you shared where, I don't know if it was a picture or a quick little video, but you had your business license and you're like, I'm really doing this.
Yeah.
And since then, I've just seen followers grow. I've seen the amount of content you create grow. I've seen different platforms and the different channels and ways that you're able to offer your creativeness grow. So, dude, I'm plugged in. I'm tuned in. I love it. I'm glad that I can be a part of it on any level. And I think that's great, man. A lot of it's like when you decide to kind of make that decision like you did and you keep following through with it, you kind of just start bringing different people into your life that align with that on purpose and not always on purpose. It kind of just finds its way because that's just what you're doing. But yeah, man, I think there's going to be a million ways that we can work together and continue to help each other, whether it's us working together on things, creating things together, or helping each other. You know, you've got a bunch of really great skill sets that absolutely help anything I'm doing and make anything I'm doing better. You know, when it comes to your ability to create great video edits, create amazing music, you're good lyrically, you can sing, you can rap, you can produce beats, you can play guitar. So you've got a lot of really good artistic skill sets that you bring to the table that can only make things better. And then vice versa, if you ever need, you know, I love that I can help out with the website. I love that, you know, I can maybe help out with a little bit of graphic design, get some merch stuff rolling. So
yeah, dude, I'm excited for all that stuff.
Absolutely.
Super excited. And I'm excited for this podcast. Like, you mentioned the community that, you know, us building a community with the podcast. And I've been thinking about it since we spoke since the last time we recorded. And I know that's going to happen. Like, I feel that, you know? Yeah.
Absolutely. We just got to keep dialing in the message and figure out really cool ways to engage people with that. Get really good with thumbnails. I think that's a game that we can get into, and I can help with that. I can help with that in a way to where, you know, just make cool little thumbnails for whatever platform you're on. That seems to get people's attention sometimes. And what else was I going to say?
And for the listeners, if you guys, we would love to hear what you guys think about the show. Give us some ideas. Tell us it sucks. Whatever. Just write an email to mcmedia.network.llc@gmail.com, and if you write us a whole letter, we'll read it on the air and we'll talk about it. We're not afraid of feedback at all.
Absolutely.
That's part of the game, you know. So we'd love to hear from you.
Light up that comment section. Watching this on YouTube, email. There's actually contact forms on the website. And I guess in order to keep it affordable, they made it a little bit shittier recently where they're not working well with certain APIs. One specifically that is needed to get the merch going really well.
Okay. I really wanted to tell you thank you. I really appreciate your help that, you know, building the website, doing the merch stuff. I really appreciate that, man.
Dude, I'm happy to do it. McMedia Network.
Is there a way for me to find that out? It'd be my Gmail.
But either way, we're going to pull it up because I want to show it. Share screen. Boom. There we go.
Oh, yeah.
You like these little thumbnails? We can make these something cool. Look at that guy, dude.
Yeah. God, I look old.
Oh, dude, it looks good. The studio takes good pictures.
I really like that.
That was the one where the light was only from the side. You had a bunch of options, but I just chose that one because it looks a little different.
Oh, it's McMediaNet.com.
McMediaNet.com. Okay, cool. So we will we'll get that pointed, but we're gonna set you up on the new hosting. It's still going to be cheap. It's like $15 a month, but it's way faster, way more secure. It's going to work well with all the APIs to run your merch program and everything. And they take full backups of the entire site daily. So let's say something weird happens to it. There's a security breach or something. We're just like, okay, let's just fire up yesterday's version, and there's not a problem.
Nice.
So yeah, there's a bunch of that we don't currently have with this cheap hosting. It's called shared hosting, and it used to be just barely good enough, but they're starting to trim the fat to where now it's not even barely good enough. It'll be way faster too. But yeah, dude, we got a lot of your
that's so
episodes.
Cool. I love that.
And then this will be cool. This isn't quite ready yet, but people that you work with, businesses, this can go back to the thing that you're talking about with we're talking about different ways to network with business owners in the community. And
oh my God, yeah.
Relationships. That could be right on there too. So yeah, dude.
Yeah, and I'm meeting a ton of people in the Rotary Club. I'm sure that they're already talking about podcasting. Everyone. And that's a wrap for today's inspiring episode where we delved into the remarkable comeback journey of Joe Rogan and Dana White, showcasing the power of unity and resilience in the face of adversity, from being vilified to verified. They exemplify the strength of the underdog spirit. Special thanks to the amazing Awful community for their support as we embark on this empowering journey together. We value your feedback, so please don't hesitate to reach the show at mcmedia.network.llc@gmail.com. Join us next time as we continue to uplift and empower one another. Remember, no dream is too big and no underdog too small. Thanks for tuning in to the Awful Podcast.